There's a moment some people recognize immediately. You're upset, but not in a loud way, not in a way that wants to argue or explain. It's more like something inside you slows down. Words that usually come easily suddenly feel far away. Thoughts blur together. You know something matters deeply, but you can't seem to reach it clearly enough to speak, so you don't. From the outside, it can look like withdrawal, like distance, like indifference. But from the inside, it rarely feels empty. It feels full, too full. People who go silent when they're upset aren't usually trying to punish anyone. They aren't calculating. They aren't shutting down because they don't care. More often, they've reached a point where speaking feels unsafe, not because of the other person, but because of what might spill out if they try. Silence in those moments isn't a decision. It's what happens when access to language temporarily disappears. When emotions rise past a certain threshold, some nervous systems don't push outward, they pull inward. Attention narrows. The body focuses on containment. It becomes less about expression and more about holding everything together long enough to stabilize. Inside that state, thoughts don't organize themselves into sentences. They exist more like sensations, pressure in the chest, tightness in the throat, a sense that everything is happening at once. Trying to speak from there can feel like trying to grab water with your hands. The harder you try, the more it slips. This is why silence, for some people, feels safer than speech. Not because silence solves anything, but because speech feels risky. There's often a quiet fear underneath it, a fear of saying something irreversible, a fear of escalating the situation, a fear of being misunderstood at the exact moment you feel most vulnerable. For many people who go silent, there's an awareness that once words are released, they can't be taken back. And in an emotionally charged state, accuracy feels impossible. Silence becomes a way to prevent harm, even if it creates confusion instead. This pattern rarely appears out of nowhere. It often forms slowly over time. Some people learned early that expressing emotions led to escalation rather than resolution, that explaining themselves didn't bring clarity, but more conflict. Others learned that strong feelings made people uncomfortable, or that being emotional meant losing credibility. Over time, they adapted. They learned to pause, to hold back, to wait until things settled internally before trying to speak. What begins as caution can gradually become instinct, and it's important to understand this isn't about weakness, it's about sensitivity to impact. People who go silent when upset often care deeply about how their words affect others. Silence becomes a way to protect the relationship, even if it doesn't always succeed at that. From the outside, this silence can be misread. It can feel like being shut out, like emotional abandonment, like stonewalling. Especially for people who process emotions by talking, silence can feel intolerable. It can create anxiety, fill the space with assumptions, and leave the other person feeling alone. This mismatch is where a lot of pain happens, not because either person is wrong, but because they're operating from different emotional languages. The silent person may be thinking, "I need time to calm down so I don't make things worse." The other person may be thinking, "If you cared, you would say something." Both experiences are real, and neither is malicious. What often gets overlooked is that silence in these moments is not emptiness, it's intense internal activity. Replaying conversations, monitoring emotional surges, trying to regain equilibrium. The person isn't disengaged, they're overwhelmed. But silence has a cost. When feelings stay unspoken for too long, they don't disappear. They compress, they harden. What started as a need for pause can slowly turn into emotional backlog. Unexpressed thoughts gain weight over time, and when they finally surface, they can feel heavier than they originally were. Silence can also create distance. not because the silent person wants distance, but because connection requires some form of visibility. When inner worlds stay hidden too often, others may stop trying to understand them, not out of cruelty, but out of fatigue. This is where silence becomes complicated. It's both protective and limiting. What helps isn't forcing speech in moments of overwhelm. That often backfires. What helps is recognizing that silence is a signal, not a flaw. A signal that emotional intensity has crossed a threshold, that the system needs time, that language will return, but only when safety is restored internally. For people who go silent, speaking usually comes back gradually, not in the heat of the moment, but later, after things settle, after thoughts line up again, after the body feels less braced. The problem is that the world often demands immediacy, quick explanations, instant reassurance, clear responses on the spot. And for someone whose system needs time, this pressure can make silence even deeper. Understanding this pattern doesn't mean staying silent forever. It means learning to respect timing, to recognize when silence is serving regulation and when it's becoming avoidance. Those two can look similar from the outside, but they feel very different on the inside. Regulating silence feels purposeful, even if it's uncomfortable. Avoidant silence feels heavy, stagnant, and increasingly isolating. The difference often comes down to whether silence eventually leads back to connection, whether it opens space for later understanding or quietly replaces communication altogether. For many people, the most important shift isn't learning to talk more. It's learning to trust that their voice will return when they're ready, and learning to communicate that need for time, even briefly, before going quiet. Not an explanation, not a defense, just a small signal that silence is about processing, not withdrawal. At its core, this pattern reflects depth, intensity, care, a nervous system that takes words seriously. People who go silent when upset often feel things fully, and that fullness requires containment before expression. Silence, then, is not the absence of emotion. It's the presence of too much emotion at once. And if this feels familiar, it might be worth asking yourself something gently, without judgment. When you go quiet, are you giving yourself the time you need to return with clarity, or are you staying silent longer than feels true to you? There's no right answer, just information, because silence isn't a character flaw, it's a language, one that deserves understanding, including from the person who speaks it. And sometimes, understanding that is the beginning of learning how and when to speak again.